Welcome to the Marnie Merrilees High Performance Psychologist podcast, where I discuss psychology and psychology-based tools for high performance and everyday life. I am Marnie Merrilees and I am a psychologist specializing in high performance. In today's podcast, I will be discussing what is therapy and why do you need it. I will touch upon the different types of therapy and consider how you can prepare for therapy and what happens in therapy and how you may feel after therapy. Also, what to do when therapy is not working and why this may be so. I will share a few testimonials from clients I have worked with in a counselling setting, which will help to give you a sense of some of the issues clients face. You may find some of these issues resonate with your own personal experience or those of people that you know. Finally, I point you in the direction of other resources for further support. Today, I'm going to ask you all to start being proactive rather than being reactive with your mental health and well-being. It's far better to seek support when you first notice you may be experiencing some psychological distress, for whatever that reason, so that these feelings, emotions, or behaviors can be explored and reflected on in a healthy way, in a safe space within a therapeutic relationship, so that you are being proactive in looking after your mental health and well-being rather than reactive, and only seeking support when you are experiencing severe psychological distress or are in crisis, or when your quality of life has been significantly impacted as a result. The sooner you seek help, the sooner you can improve, and the less likely you are to continue on a downward spiral. Like most problems, they don't go away on their own, and certainly not by burying your head in the sand. And the longer you leave them, the worse they get. And the result is that they can then take twice as long to resolve compared to if you nip them in the bud in the first place. So the key takeaway here is to be proactive in your mental health and well-being rather than reactive. Today we're going to cover the following topics. So we're going to look at what is therapy? Why do you need therapy? And signposting to professionals. So throughout today's episode, I may use the terms therapy and counselling interchangeably. And you may have heard people talk about psychotherapy, psychological therapy, and talking therapies. Usually, there's very little difference by what is meant by these terms. They all broadly refer to talking therapy, as opposed to other types of treatments such as drug therapy. But they might indicate differences in the type of talking therapies available. Talking therapies are treatments which involve talking to a trained professional about your thoughts, feelings, and behavior. There are many different types of talking therapy, but they all aim to give you a safe time and place to talk to someone who won't judge you, help you make sense of things and understand yourself better, help you resolve complicated feelings or find ways to live with them, and to help you to recognize unhelpful patterns in the way you think or act and find ways to change them if you want to. So why do we need therapy? Therapy can help you manage and cope with difficult life events, for example, such as bereavement or losing your job. We all know how stressful each of those are. Relationship problems, upsetting or traumatic experiences, whether it's something recent or something that happened a long time ago. Difficult emotions such as grief, guilt, sadness, confusion, anger, and low self-esteem. Depression and anxiety, or other mental health problems such as addictions, long-term physical health problems. Talking therapies can differ in their focus. For example, learning more about yourself by talking about your past or working on overcoming a specific problem you have now. Also, the techniques a therapist might use during sessions and the academic theory behind them. Many therapists are trained in several different styles and will tailor their approach for you. In this case, they might also use words like eclectic, blended, integrative when they describe how they work. Like me personally, I use an eclectic approach. So I use a collection of different approaches. So some more common types of therapy are psychodynamic, which explores how your unconscious thoughts might affect the way you act. Cognitive explores your thoughts, so the way you think, such as cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, you may be familiar with. Person-centered approach, which focuses on using your own strengths and insight about yourself to encourage personal growth and improve relationships. A humanistic approach focuses on the individual as a whole, so including the mind, body, and soul. Solution-focused approach focuses on what it is you want to achieve in the future, rather than focusing on past experiences. Mindfulness involves becoming aware of all your current thoughts and feelings and accepting them. Often mindfulness techniques such as meditation and breathing exercises, for example. Preparing for therapy. At this initial stage, it's important to mention any special requirements or preferences you may have. For example, if you'd feel most comfortable seeing a therapist of a particular gender, or who speaks your first language, or has a particular specialism. If you have therapy face-to-face, so that's in person, there are some things you could do to make the session feel more comfortable. So for example, to make the room feel more safe and comfortable. You could ask to change where you sit, or adjust the lighting, or the temperature of the room so you feel more relaxed. So nowadays, many of us have remote therapy, such as over the phone or the internet. For example, via a chat-based function or video calls such as Zoom or Google Meet, rather than in person, face-to-face. So initially, you may worry that it will be harder to have an open and honest conversation. However, in my experience, I can reassure you that this is not the case. Once you get used to the remote sessions and you develop a good rapport with and a therapeutic relationship with your counsellor. These are some tips to help your sessions feel more comfortable. So for example, try and find a place in your home where you won't be disturbed. If you're worried about being heard by people you live with, you could try using headphones for the session or go somewhere more private, such as in your car, or go for a walk. Individual therapy is one-to-one counselling with a therapist, whereas group therapy is more than one person with a therapist. One-to-one sessions typically last between 50 minutes and an hour, but group sessions can sometimes be longer. It's common for sessions to be held once a week, but you might also agree to see your therapist more or less often, and that is fine. It all depends on how busy your schedule is, what else you've got going on in your life as to how frequently you can have those sessions. Like some clients prefer once a fortnight because it gives them more time to work on things outside of the session, what were discussed in the session, rather than feeling like it's all happening a bit too quick. How sessions are structured can vary depending on the type of therapy you're getting and the type of problem you want help with. The quality of the therapeutic relationship, otherwise known as working alliance, has been demonstrated to be especially important in predicting the outcome of therapy. The working alliance has been defined as the extent to which a patient and therapist work collaboratively and purposefully and connect emotionally. So it's very important that you have a good relationship with your therapist or counsellor. So your therapist might describe themselves in various ways, such as a counsellor, a wellbeing practitioner, a therapist or psychotherapist, a clinical psychologist or psychologist, a psychiatrist. All of these titles mean the person you see is trained in delivering therapy, although they will differ in their educational backgrounds and levels of training. But whatever their title and level of training, it matters that the person delivering your therapy is someone that you feel comfortable talking to. The relationship you have with your therapist is really important in how successful you will find talking therapy. Regardless of the type of therapy they practice, if you don't like or trust that person, you're less likely to be able to feel you can open up to them, and then less likely to have a positive experience. What to expect in your first therapy session. It's good practice for any therapist to be registered member of one of the professional bodies. This means they've signed up to meet certain standards of practice. You can ask your therapist about their professional qualifications, training, and membership body. And you can usually double check this through the membership body website. So when I'm meeting a client for the first time, initially I'll focus on introductions and developing a rapport. Then we will work through the therapeutic contract, which I call housekeeping. And here I explain the limits of confidentiality. So if the client was found to be a danger to themselves or others, a victim of perpetrator of abuse of children or the elderly, if a court ordered the release of the information. Otherwise, all of the information in the sessions will be between the client and the practitioner, unless otherwise stated. So then normally go on to informing the client that I'd have a supervisor and that it may be in the interest of the client to discuss details of the case with my supervisor, reassuring the client that the supervisor also works within an ethical framework and that anything discussed would also be confidential. If instances were to arise where the manager or coach requested information or that the athlete or client required me to share information, written consent would be required, and any wording or progress reports would be agreed with the athlete or client before passing on to the manager or coach. I also inform my client about data protection and record keeping, and boundaries, which will always be detailed in the initial contract, such as the number and the duration of the sessions. So, for example, there'll be 12 sessions in total, each lasting 1 hour long. And the second session ideally would be no more than 1 week from the first session. At this point, I usually inform the client of any holidays, and I also check to see if the client has any holidays booked then also. And then we arrange session times around these times. The therapeutic contract will usually have a cancellation policy. Mine states that 24 hours notice will be required if the client fails to attend an appointment, that the client, by signing this contract, agrees to pay a charge of said fee to the practitioner. And the practitioner, myself, retains the right to waive this fee in exceptional circumstances. I will be punctual and I expect the same of the client. I inform the client of the referral procedures in case I'm not able to continue working with him or her. Also inform the client that some weeks they may be asked to carry out some homework tasks, such as things as keeping a log of their thoughts or feelings. And I also inform the client that I'll ask them to complete an evaluation of sessions. So this is a good tool to use at the end of each session to gauge if I'm on the right track to best meet the needs of the client. And then if I'm not, then we can have the discussion and find out what needs to be addressed to help best meet those needs of the client. I also make the client aware that I'm happy to accept feedback from what works well for the client or what the client doesn't like. That way I can be the most effective for the client. I also ask towards the end of going through this therapeutic contract if the client has any questions that they would like answered. I will then carry out an appropriate assessment based on the particular client I am working with. And then from there, I'll carry out a risk assessment. So I'll check for suicide risk, self-harm, drug or alcohol abuse, anorexia, and so on. And then we can decide if we can work together from there. Then I will also negotiate with my client what the focus of the sessions they would like to be based on the outcome of the assessment that has taken place. So then an agreed outcome would be generally to carry out 2 performance enhancement interventions when I'm working with performance clients, with the intention to address the issue identified by the client. And this gets all written into the contract. And then if I'm working with general clients, they will decide how the sessions go, what it is they want to work on most. So what happens in therapy? Sometimes it's hard to talk to family and friends, and you just need that one person who takes the time to listen. What you might cover in therapy sessions varies. So for example, your therapist may go through some specific exercises with you, or you may have more general discussion about how you're feeling. They may ask you questions about your current and past relationships, your childhood and past experiences, situations or events you find difficult, how you're feeling, how you behave, what you think about things, issues that have come up in previous sessions. But it's important to remember that you don't have to talk about anything that you're not ready to talk about, or do anything that you don't want to. Also, it's important to note, therapy does not, this is important, therapy does not involve giving advice or directing a client to take a particular course of action. Therapy is there to empower the individual to make these decisions for themselves. It is not the right, nor is it the responsibility of the therapist or counsellor to do this for the client. How will I feel after a therapy session? It's common to feel a range of emotions after a session. For example, you might come out of a session feeling relieved if you've shared something important and felt heard and understood, energized if you'd started to understand something new about yourself, or you've set yourself a new goal or task to work on. You may feel exhausted if you found the session challenging or hard work. Sometimes you may feel frustrated if you didn't get what you wanted out of your session, or you haven't felt heard or understood. Sometimes you may feel upset or overwhelmed if the session has brought up very painful or difficult memories or feelings. Sometimes therapy sessions can bring up feelings that are difficult for you to cope with, and you might feel nervous about going back or like you want to quit. After your therapy session, remember to be gentle on yourself and do something to help you relax or you enjoy doing before you go back to your usual routine, such as going for a walk. This is important because, as I've just described, there's a range of emotions that you may feel after a therapy session. So you need to give yourself some time to sort of acclimatize for coming out of the therapy session and then for going into your next segment of life, whatever that may be. You may be going back to work, or you may be going to join family members. But it's important that you try and find the time to give yourself at least 15 minutes to acclimatize and to sort of come to terms with the emotions and feelings that you've had in the session. So, dealing with therapy coming to an end, it's common to have a mixture of thought and emotions about finishing therapy. It's likely to depend on the experience that you've had and the relationship you've formed with your therapist. There's no one particular way that you're supposed to feel. A good therapist will help you prepare better for the therapy coming to an end. And if you're worried about how you'll cope, tell your therapist how you're feeling, as they will better prepare you for the therapy ending. So, what to do if therapy is not helping? Therapeutic relationships can be challenging. It can take time to build trust and feel comfortable with a therapist. And it is common to have times when you may feel frustrated or upset after a session. But, and this is the big but, if you feel that even after trying for a while, you're really not happy with how it's going, in this case, you may want to consider talking to your therapist about any problems you're having with them, asking your therapist whether they can offer you a different type of therapy, asking your GP or the NHS service if there is another therapist you can work with, finding another therapist, especially if you're accessing therapy privately, or ending your therapy to seek alternatives instead. And how to complain about therapy. If you have a serious concern about the treatment you have received, you can complain. Your therapist should tell you their complaints process if you ask them for it. If that doesn't feel possible, you could ask the therapist what professional body they've registered with. Then you make your complaint through that body. All professional bodies should have a complaints procedure you can follow. If you're unsure how you feel and want another opinion before making a complaint, you can contact the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, or BACP for short, to get help with counselling concerns. This is a confidential telephone and email service for any questions or concerns you have about good and bad practice in therapy. Or contact the Clinic for Boundary Studies, which provides support services for people who feel they have been harmed by someone in a position of trust. I will document this information later on, and it will be detailed on my YouTube channel. Now, it's commonplace for therapists to use outcome measures to keep a track if they are best meeting the needs of the client at the end of every session and at the end of the overall therapy ending. Client testimonials are also very informative for others seeking therapy. I will share a few testimonials from clients I've worked with, which will help to give you a sense of some of the issues clients face. Some may resonate with you. So client A, he was male. He presented with social anxiety. This is a testimonial that was written by him. When talking with Marnie, I feel more and more empowered, as she has a real knack of helping me to realize my anxiety is controllable, and I just need to remind myself of where I have been, how far I have come, and I know I can go as far as I need to in the effort of becoming the confident man I used to be and can be again. Absolutely fantastic, and thank you again. And that also comes from my family, as my issue also became theirs with the thought of, would I ever be ready for this wedding? Revisiting all the skills I have learned during my sessions, I embark on a cruise, and that has been a real concern of mine. But having worked with Marnie, I feel confident I have the skills to deal with any unexpected situations that may arise. And whilst revisiting the skills, it helped me to realize just how much I have come on since these sessions have started. So that was a really lovely testimonial to the work that we did together. And I will say that you only get out of therapy what you put in. So it's no good turning up to a therapy session and expecting a therapist to wave a magic wand and ta-da, everything will be fixed and everything will be okay. It doesn't work like that. In order to embark on therapy, and I say embark because it is like a journey. It's a journey of discovery, of self-awareness, of learning to get to know yourself more and learning to love yourself more, understanding your own needs, wants, and desires more, which then ultimately transpire to be a happier, more productive individual. Obviously depending on what the issue is that you come to therapy with. But it does require a lot of hard work, depending on the issue, and a lot of reflecting on how you feel and how you behave, and implementing homework to try and help you learn new skills, new, better ways of coping. Often people come to therapy because they've learned coping skills that were beneficial in childhood, but as in adulthood, they no longer serve them well. They become maladaptive, so they become detrimental to the person functioning as an adult within society, within families. So sometimes you have to unlearn unhealthy coping mechanisms and then relearn more healthy coping mechanisms. So client B presented with severe anxiety attacks daily. And this was a female. Her testimonial reads, I feel that therapy has given me a real sense of perspective on why I was feeling so anxious. Knowing that I would need to discuss the things I had been doing between sessions gave me motivation to put real effort into challenging my behaviour. The thought challenging has been the most useful thing, and learning which things are and are not in my control. Looking at things with a more performance than outcome base has also relieved a lot of pressure and anxiety, and has enabled me to become more confident in delegating. I generally feel much more positive and less anxious on a day-to-day basis, which is a very big change compared to my anxiety levels when I self-referred. I would just like to thank you all for your help. It has made going through the exercise and learning the new skills so much more effective. Having someone to challenge the negative and unhelpful thought I was having gave me good insight into the fact that the coping mechanisms I had in place since childhood were not working, and that if I put in the effort, that I would get the results, which I absolutely have. Again, you can see there how She talked about maladaptive coping mechanisms from childhood, which she was continuing to use into adulthood, which were causing problems in her adult life. Then client C presented with severe low mood and self-harm. This was a male. Just a brief testimonial, this one. So at the time when I first started therapy, I was in a really bad place mentally, and therapy has helped me so much. So much so I continue to recommend it to colleagues going through similar things. The iceberg effect really allowed me to look at my life in a more positive way. Now, when he mentioned the iceberg effect here, it's because when I was working with him, what he was doing, he was perceiving everybody, seeing everybody's successes, and he was feeling like a failure all of the time, like comparing himself to others, so social comparison, and it was doing his mental health no good at all. So I used the analogy of the iceberg effect, which I often use, where an iceberg, you see 1/3 above the surface, and the 2/3 which you don't see are below the surface. So often when you look at others and see how successful people are, or see their failures as well, these are what are visible to the human eye. What people don't see is what lies beneath the surface. Now, this is the 2/3 what goes on beneath the surface. So whatever you're doing under the surface on the daily grind is what will transpire for other people to see on the surface. So if you're putting in your daily grind, sticking to your goals, being proactive in doing what it is you want to do in terms of where you want to go, the iceberg for you will be successful. But what was happening in this instance, he was really struggling on the 2/3 under the surface. He was finding life sometimes, as we all know, comes at you with curveballs and will beat you and beat you and beat you. But if you keep going forward and you're relentless in that, you will get your head above water and you can go forward. But for him, he just felt like he was sinking and he couldn't really see a way out. So we worked together and to help to change his perspective on how he viewed his success and the success of others, and also his failures and the failures of others, which really, really helped him realize that he wasn't a failure. And then client D, an agoraphobic female with anxiety, is also, she put, I have been able to leave the house alone and enjoy my life. I now know ways of coping with my anxiety, deep breathing exercises, etc., and feel confident using these techniques. If things feel too much, my therapist has been really helpful and informative throughout the experience. My therapist was friendly, understanding, helpful, and approachable. Thank you for all your help and support. So there's some really nice testimonials there. And this is why I'm so passionate about doing the job that I do. I like to help people become the best version of themselves. So client E had severe low mood, was male, helping me realize how much mindfulness is important to my own mental health and the importance of speaking about how I feel. Marnie has had a massive impact, not just on my mental health, but my family dynamics. I don't know if she realizes how much. I am so glad to have had the chance to engage with Marnie. She has made my family a happy place again. And that really does warm the cockles of my heart and put a smile on my face, because it's nice not only to help clients, but also to see how by them working through their issues and getting themselves to be in a better place mentally, that the impact that has on the larger family and family relationships and other relationships as a whole is nice. So I mentioned I was going to discuss signposting to professionals. So there is further support available from various organisations depending on individual circumstances, such as the Samaritans, Relate, Turning Point, and so on. I will put details of the various support organisations in the description section of today's episode on my YouTube channel. Marnie Merrilees, the high performance psychologist. Also, regulatory bodies and directories such as the British Psychological Society, where you can find resources and a list of chartered psychologists. The British Association of Counsellors, which provides information and a list of accredited therapists, among others, which you may find useful. And again, I will put the details of various support organisations on the description section in today's podcast episode on my YouTube channel, Marnie Merrilees, her high performance psychologist. So just to recap what we've covered today. So in today's episode, we have discussed what therapy is and when do we need it. We have touched upon the different types of therapy and considered how to prepare for therapy and what happens in therapy and how you may be feeling after therapy, and also what to do if therapy is not helping. So then finally, I just briefly shared some testimonials with you from previous clients to help give you a feel of some of the issues that clients may present with. And then I suggested some further resources, which I will be putting on my YouTube channel for your reference. So today's takeaway is to start being proactive in your mental health and well-being rather than being reactive. So the sooner you seek help, the sooner you can improve and the less likely you are to continue on a downward spiral. And remember, it's good to talk. Thank you for joining me for today's episode titled, What is Therapy and Why Do You Need It? If you're learning from and enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Marnie Merrilees, High Performance Psychologist. That's a great zero-cost way to support me. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast both on Spotify and Apple, where you can leave me up to a 5-star review. That's the best way to support this podcast. If you've any questions for me or comments about the podcast or topics or guests that you would like me to feature on Marnie Merrilees, the High Performance Psychologist podcast, please put those comments in the section on YouTube. I do read all the comments. If you're not already following me on social media, I am Marnie Merrilees. That's MarnieMerrilees across all social media platforms. So that's Instagram, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Threads. And on all those platforms, I discuss psychology and psychology-based tools for high performance and everyday life. Some of the content overlaps, that of which is discussed on Marnie Merrilees' High Performance Psychology podcast, but most of it is distinct. So again, Marnie Merrilees, MarnieMerrilees across all social media platforms. Thank you again for joining me on today's podcast titled, What is Therapy and Why Do You Need It? And finally, thank you for your interest in psychology.